Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, the Geek show podcast that looks at the good, the bad and the weird of movies either starring, by or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a short filmmaker and writer for the Geek show, Byline Times, and We Are Cult. And I've been joined this week by...
Hello, I'm Jeff Pizak. You can find me on Letterboxd at Scrambled Face, and maybe Google me and find some of my old stuff. But that's where I'm writing these days.
So we've been doing a month of Madonna-themed movies to celebrate the 40th anniversary of a breakthrough single holiday. We've already covered Dick Tracy, which is a blockbuster success. We've covered her trip into the art house with Abel Ferrara's Dangerous Game. But aren't you aware, listeners, of the torrid affair she had in the mid-80s with Weird Al Yankovic? Because that's what today's film is about, is it not?
Yeah, she's definitely a big part of this one.
It's Weird, the Al Yankovic Story, which we've been talking about doing this for a while because we did UHF late last year, didn't we?
Yep. Yeah, it was my pleasure to introduce you to Weird Al Yankovic. This is his next. His next big movie too. So I mean, it had been maybe 30 some years since his previous theatrical hits. Well, not a hit, but this was the follow up from 2022. Came out maybe a year ago or so.
And it was on the Rock You channel, which I'm such a TV and streaming ignoramus that I had to carefully research this. Before we get into the actual film, we should celebrate the fact that Rock You have the rights to the Quibi archive, an absolutely vital piece of streaming history, in my opinion. And one that's already played into this Madonna month, because when I was trying to find a place where I could watch Dangerous Game online, I kept coming up with results saying, do you want to watch the Quibi version of The Most Dangerous Game? And listeners, I did not, but that's tormented me before, but we got it in the end. This has quite an odd genesis, doesn't it? I mean, even beyond it being a film 30 years later of a guy who had one previous movie.
Yeah, I want to say it was a Funny or Die sketch initially. And I want to say Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad starred as Weird Al in that, and it was a fake trailer for a pseudo serious, melodramatic, adaptation of the life of Weird Al Yankovic.
Yeah, and that short film, I think, was about sort of 10 years. Yeah, 2010, so 12 years before the finished film. And I think we've complained about music biopics on this podcast before, usually when Mark Harrison is on, as he hates them. They are a guilty pleasure of mine, and I think it's a weird sort of tribute to the durability of the form that you can parody one in 2010 and parody one in 2022, and it still hits the target, really. It's not become irrelevant.
Sure. Yeah. I have to admit, I'm also on the side of folks who kind of discount the biopic, just in general, for all the usual complaints. It's a very formulaic type of storytelling. Usually, it usually hits a lot of the same beats regardless of who they're covering, and to me, that usually makes those particular artists seem less special because it's like Ray Charles, Little Richard, whoever you've got, they're people who have, they've all done the same thing. They all like magically picked up an instrument and knew how to play it. They all, heard their song on the radio the first time. I think that, we'll maybe bring it up later, but I've been one of those people who say, I don't understand how they still make these after Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox Story, which,
Yes.
it really skewered all the the stereotypes and the usual things you see in these movies, to the point where I'm like, I don't it's pretty rare that you see one these days that tries to shake up the formula because it's just so ingrained, but again, like I said, it makes the artist seem a little less special because of it.
Yeah, I mean, even as someone who often enjoys these films, there are huge pitfalls in just baked into the form, really. The one that bothers me the most is that it is very hard for an actor, even a great actor, to pick up a musical instrument and pretend they've just come up with a song that's been world famous for about 50 years at the time the film was made. That's why I think by far the best of the recent music biopics is Rocket Man, because it's an
Yeah.
actual musical, and you don't have to have that moment of inspiration. He can just sort of sit down and start playing Crocodile Rock or whatever. Um,
I just say I totally agree with you on Rocket Man. I had some issues with the way the story was told, but I definitely appreciate the creativity and the way they tried to, subvert that formula we're talking about. So yeah, for sure.
yeah, definitely. It's always worth digging out if any listeners haven't seen that yet. But this, I was really satisfied at how well this clobbered the sort of sudden moment of inspiration cliche. Because, of course, if you were making a straight biopic of Weird Al Yankovic, then, I mean, first, you've missed the point of the artist pretty substantially. But secondly, you don't need those moments. His moment of inspiration is hearing a song on the radio and thinking, okay, what can I do with that? But there's like, I mean, this does have one scene like that in with the My Sharona scene, which is amazingly funny, I think.
Yeah, yeah, he gets he gets instantly inspired because he's making sandwiches and the knack is on the radio, and
Mm,
somehow the record is skipping to make
yeah,
him think on the chorus, so he's thinking Sharona, 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 and then finally he's making a bologna sandwich, so of course this is what you do. Yeah, exactly. That's in this movie does a lot of that where it's taking those scenes that you see in those music biopics. Inspiration strikes him to go record in the bathroom and at the bus station.
yeah,
um, which is even that is kind of a skewering of the truth because he did record that song in a bathroom, but it was across the hall from his college radio station. So even there, they're kind of taking a real piece of factoid and even twisting it around into something fictional. So and again, we might get into this later, but I think that for me, like being a huge Weird Al fan, that stuff is really fun because it's even more than skewering the format of a biopic or the running joke that Weird Al is generally a nice, clean living kind of guy, and so they make him out to be kind of a wild guy in this. So beyond those jokes, it's the stuff that is kind of true that they tweak a little bit and make into a fiction that for me is the real fun of this movie. But it doesn't preclude someone who doesn't know about a lot about Weird Al from enjoying it too.
well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know much like biographical facts about Weird Al, so a lot of this I discovered while I was researching this episode. But there's a few things that are genuine in there. He really did get his first accordion from a door-to-door salesman, except I assume that in real life that door-to-door accordion salesman was not beaten to death by his father immediately afterwards.
Right. Yeah. No. In fact, from what I know, his parents were pretty supportive of him.
Right.
Um, they would appear in stuff that he did. They were kind of like side characters to his little universe for a while. So yeah, all the stuff with the parents, is again, it's playing more on the biopic,
Mm.
where the kid is, breaking out from his parents and doing something subversive. They have these shameful secrets. In this case, he's hiding his Hawaiian shirts, and he's got his accordion in the closet, and the whole him being in the closet. It's just that he's like accordion player, so yeah, like I think a lot of that stuff is kind of fun.
I have a great soft spot for films that take place in a sort of unannounced parallel universe, like how Repo Man is in a world quite like ours, except there's no such thing as a brand name. There are just cans labeled drink
Right.
and food.
Right.
Uh, and I think this has an absolute doozy of one, which is something that you've touched on there, which is that here accordion music seems to have taken the place of rock and roll as like the key outlet for teenage rebellion.
Yeah, there's that whole like teen party that he sneaks off to, where kids are, sitting around talking about their favorite polka artists, and
Mm.
the highlight is when someone brings out an accordion, and he gets to show off his skills there. Yeah, yeah, that's if only we had a world where polka was that dominant.
We've talked about the early stage of the movie, but by this point we are into Al's young manhood, and that seems like a good juncture to play up the thing that I think most people know about this film, which is the extraordinary fact that Weird Al is played by Daniel Radcliffe.
Yes,
And
yeah, he's
what a
fantastic.
performance it is.
Yeah, right, isn't he? Yeah, he's so good, and he really throws himself into it. I can't think of anything I've seen Daniel Radcliffe in, after Harry Potter, maybe even including Harry Potter, where he just was not committed like that, and
Mm.
it really, even if you're not a fan of Weird Al, or of the humor in here, you have to give him credit for, just fully committing. He even gets the voice right sometimes when he gets into that kind of hysterical high register. I mean, he's pretty good.
Yeah, I think he's terrific, and I think my film going path has sort of occasionally sort of intersected with Daniel Radcliffe's career. He's done a fair bit of stuff that I haven't seen, but every now and then I see him in
Sure.
something, and I'm just reminded of how extraordinary it is that someone who starred in a movie series that, love it or hate it, is generationally significant. Like there are people in the generation, sort of, I guess the younger millennial cohort, slightly younger than me, whose
Hmm.
cinema going lives is marked out by the beginning and the end of the Harry Potter franchise. And after that sort of success, everyone says they're just going to concentrate on doing some small indies and stretching themselves. But I don't think there is anyone else in the world who has taken that license and just dicked around as much as Daniel Radcliffe, and it's pretty incredible to watch.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, the one that comes to mind for me right away is Swiss Army Man,
Mm, yeah,
which I didn't get around to until after, Everything Everywhere came out, and yeah, wow, I mean, for playing a corpse, he really steals the movie.
yeah,
Uh,
and
yeah, he's
and
great.
that's it's another example of what you were saying about his Weird Al Yankovic performance. It is that when you give him when you give him everything, I guess he commits to everything, but it's like you expect someone to commit pretty hard when they're playing, a prisoner in apartheid either South Africa. that's something where you expect commitment. But there's
Sure.
something about the way Radcliffe commits to very, very silly ideas that makes you think, oh wow, this guy's, there's a drive to him that is quite incredible to watch, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of the performers in this movie really, really go for it and get to have fun. From the small parts to the major ones.
We should talk about some of those other major parts because there's we've seen Al's parents. I wasn't that familiar with the actor playing his father, although I feel it's going to be one of those guys that I've seen in about 94 things and just accepted him as the character, right?
Yeah, his name is Toby Huss, and he's one of those character actors that like registered for me at some point, and he is indeed. Yeah, he's in a lot of stuff. So yeah, if you just Google him,
Hmm.
um, his mom too, like Julianne Nicholson, I believe is
Yeah,
the actress, and she's um, I guess was on one of the Law and Orders, but again, someone I didn't immediately recognize, but this second time watching it, I said, I think I've seen her before in other stuff too, and yeah, the two of them are both pretty hardworking character actors.
well, Julianne Nicholson amused me greatly because she was also in another biopic of 2022 where she played the repressive religious mother of another 20th century icon, which was Andrew Dominik's Blonde. And
Hmm.
I felt like you could probably do compilation scenes of her appearances in both of those films, and if you just cut them together right, people would not know which one was the spoof.
Yeah, maybe I have not seen Blonde, but yeah, from everything I've read about it, yeah, I can imagine that being an interesting, you know, compare and contrast.
Yeah, it's a very odd film, Blonde. I like Dominic tremendously, and when Killing Them Softly came out, I was absolutely in the cheerleaders' corner for that. I could not believe how bad a reception that wonderful film got, but Blonde is just like it's got two notes and it's gonna hammer them out for 3 hours.
Yeah, I've from every again like every I have not seen it, but everything I read about it told me, yeah, maybe I'll pass on that. It just
Yeah.
sounded like just brutally, driving home how terrible Marilyn Monroe's life was and how everyone just abused her. And
Mm.
I get that sense. I don't necessarily need to watch it, So,
Yeah.
and this is coming from a big horror movie fan, so yeah.
I think some of the more positive reviews of it that I read were saying that it works as a horror movie, and they were comparing it to Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and I thought, well, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is a film with a lot going on in it, and I don't think I could say the same for Blonde, but I think you could probably make a similar criticism in terms of idea density of this film. It is kind of a one joke film. It's just that
Mm.
the one joke is pretty damn good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, the first time I watched this, I had an idea of what it was, and I think I found it actually funnier the second time because um, I wasn't just noticing that one joke.
Yeah.
Weird Al is he doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, never really did drugs, So any of that time that note keeps getting hammered in here, that oh look he's going off the deep end again. That stuff, I at first I was like, oh okay, it's a good joke, but the rewatching it gets funnier. I feel just because they're so committed to it and they keep going back to it.
Mm. I mean, it's also the sort of other way of looking at it, which I guess this is the same joke, but it's viewing it in different ways. That it is treating Weird Al's sort of art and music in exactly the kind of po-faced way that a lot of conventional musical biopics do. And I enjoyed the way they managed to ring the changes on that. Because on the one hand, you've got the My Bologna scene, which is the archetypal musical biopic sort of inspiration scene, the the recording of it, going off to post it to a DJ, and then turning on the radio and hearing your song for the first time. It hits all of the cliches there, but
Yeah.
when it has to I'm saying it has to deal with his other songs, like there's sort of some fan base who'd be really furious if it didn't cover every single one of his songs, but the other ones it manages to bring some interesting changes on, particularly the treatment of Eat It, I thought, which is a
Mhm.
really unexpected twist on that central joke of Al as tortured artist.
Yeah, yeah, his song being stolen and parodied, his one attempt at making an original song gets stolen and parodied by Michael Jackson of all people. So, um, yeah, yeah, there was previously in the '80s, Weird Al made a cable special called The Complete Al,
Mm,
Compleat, and it was a parody uh, of the form of the complete Beatles, which was a hit on video around the same time. So, and
right.
that's something I didn't even know. I watched the Complete Al like a lot when I was a child, and moved in with a friend in college who was a big Beatles fan, who said, I love Weird Al, but this is also a parody of the Complete Beatles. So recommend that to anyone who wants to even further dive on Al. But in that one, he kind of dramatizes the process of asking Michael Jackson for his approval to do Eat It.
Oh yeah.
And it's this long, he enters this spooky castle and walks down this long, and they're playing off of the Thriller image, obviously. But
Mm.
he walks down this long hallway and is like begging Michael Jackson, who's just kind of this silent figure who eventually has to do sort of a Roman emperor, thumbs up or thumbs down on the idea, and ultimately gives him the thumbs up. But as Al's walking out excited, Michael Jackson turns into a werewolf, and so yeah. So I mean, he's covered that process a couple times, and I thought it was really funny. And here that that subversion you mentioned, he completely did a different take on that. So I think
Yeah.
it's funny that he's been able to play with that, even just that story, a few times in his career.
I mean, I haven't seen the complete Al, but one thing that I is obviously going to be very different in that mid 80s version is that there are a lot of references to and parodies of specific music biopics that have come out since then. And as
Yes.
someone who had the not entirely pleasant experience of watching Oliver Stone's The Doors for this very podcast, I think that was one of my favourites. The drunken Jim Morrison style on
Yes.
stage rant is terrific.
And the crazy acid trip. When
Yes.
his mentor slash manager, which is also not true. Dr. Demento was his, I say, mentor and kind of early champion, but he definitely wasn't his manager. And I severely doubt he fed Weird Al LSD laced guacamole. But yeah, that acid trip, not exactly a Doors, reference in itself and the way they do it, but yeah, yeah, I
There's
think
a
that yeah,
certain
there's
yeah,
probably
it's
some of it.
yeah, definitely. Um I mean, obviously, the thing about watching it now is when he just goes on stage and starts shouting about how all of his fans are idiots and he doesn't respect any of them. You also think, oh, he's parodying Doja Cat now. But, but yeah, Dr. Demento, who I think we mentioned a bit on UHF, is like one of those American entertainment figures who I am only familiar with through like Simpsons jokes and things like this. He's played by Rainn Wilson, and I think, well, he's very entertaining, but I have no idea how that portrayal like matches up to the real guy at all.
I again, the character is obviously very stylized and exaggerated. He's hanging out at a punk club when he discovers Weird Al.
Mm,
He again becomes his manager. I think all that stuff is kind of embellished. He was a radio DJ syndicated show that went out to various stations, and I think he was out of California originally, but Weird Al just he did send him his music and he played it and it became a hit there. I think they kind of helped each other actually become more popular because as a kid growing up, I knew of Dr. Demento because of Weird Al. Um,
yeah.
so that's I yeah, and again, a lot of the stuff that Rainn Wilson does with him, he has this the most amazing party of all time at his house.
Yes.
I don't think Dr. Demento was doing all that, but yeah, that party is probably the best scene in the movie for me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that scene, and we do need to talk about some of the cameos in there because it
Oh yeah.
is dense with them, dense with them. Um, I was sort of I was fascinated at the start because the first thing you see is a couple of guys from Devil with the familiar kind of red uh, pyramidal kind of hats on. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Were they considered like a novelty band at that point? But then he goes into the party and it's just like every famous person in America at that point in history is going through there. Some of which, I would watch a whole movie with Dimitri Martin as Tiny Tim. That's a
Yes.
biopic in itself. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Uh, I really liked what's his name, Jorma. I'm going to say his last name wrong. Tacone, from
that's
the
what I
Lonely
would think it
Island.
was. Yeah.
He's Pee Wee Herman in it, R.I.P.
Mm.
But I think he's the first person to have played Pee Wee Herman and Adolf Hitler on screen. So good for him in Kung Fury. Um, but yeah, some of those lines. Yeah, I tried to write down everyone who was in it just to
Mm.
remind myself. You've got Divine, Grace Jones, Dali, Warhol, Elvira, Elton John, Frank Zappa, Gallagher. I mean, whatever it was, it was the '80s. But Alice Cooper. Yeah, you mentioned Tiny Tim. I think I noticed someone who was supposed to be Kate Pearson from the B-52s this
That is
time.
correct. Yes.
Wolfman Jack, and no, don't forget Roger Deacon. Yeah.
It was it Deacon or was it? I've just looking down the cast list now. Where is it? Because it's David Dastmalchian, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, John Deacon. John Deacon. I say, right, not Roger Deacon. I'm getting my
Oh yeah.
my rock stars messed up, but yeah,
Well, that's quite a sort of that's an interesting statement on one of the things that the scene is about, which is that apparently when Al was like hashing out the deals to feature these artists and feature his parodies of their songs again in the film, one of the conditions that the members of Queen had is that he could not feature Freddie Mercury in the film, who I guess was like the route one candidate if you want to do a scene about Queen. And I think whatever rationale they had of that, it has made the scene immeasurably funnier. It's like David Dastmalchian has to come and go, oh yeah, I'm John Deacon. It's just deadly positive. The bassist out of Queen, and everyone's like, oh right, yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, no, it's just nonstop. I mean, honestly, like there's that would be outside of Cyndi Lauper and who shows up later as Dr. Demento's date at the awards ceremony.
Yeah.
I think that it would have been the greatest party of all time. It's like all my favorite '80s American icons in one place.
And so some of these casting decisions are fabulous. I mean, Emo Phillips is so great as
Yes,
Salvador Dali. That's a
yes,
brilliant performance. He's not the only artist there, because you got Conan O'Brien as Andy Warhol.
Hmm.
Uh, Conan O'Brien joining a sort of canon of screen Andy Warhols that includes Jared Harris, David Bowie, and Guy Pearce, which is extraordinary company to be in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
I do love that Paul F. Tompkins cameo as Gallagher, which does nod a bit to his later reputation as. I guess if this whole film is like a joke about what it would be like if Weird Al took himself painfully seriously, real life Gallagher is that joke. Real life
Yeah.
Gallagher famously took his watermelon smashing art incredibly seriously.
Oh yeah, and is he also thinks took himself as a political commentator and all sorts of things that again, as a child I would watch Gallagher. He would have TV specials, and I remember him smashing things, but I don't remember all the other stuff that
Yeah.
was also there. So
Yeah, it's strange. I don't know whether it was always there or whether he was just one of those guys who got sort of slightly bitter after his moments sort of passed by. But yeah, I remember reading. This is the second time in this month that we're mentioning an AV Club interview. We mentioned the Abel Ferrara one on the Dangerous Game episode, but man, back when that site was good, their interviews were extraordinary, and they did an absolutely unhinged one with Gallagher where he I think the thing that sticks out most in my head was he was complaining about comedians who had a glass of water with them on stage. And he was saying like that, what does that water mean? What does it add to the act? It just shows that they haven't thought about their art. Yeah,
sure.
they could just want to stay hydrated. I don't know.
Yeah, you're up there talking for an hour. You kind of want something to wet the whistle, but okay, sure. Yeah, yeah. No, he sticks out interestingly among the group, and I think that like his presence among those people is funny in itself,
Mm,
just because it does tend to be a lot of progressive, creative, very,
canonical kind of art figures.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he's definitely more of like the vulgar, kind of artist, So yeah, it's an interesting comparison to have him in there too.
I think musically as well, that scene ends brilliantly because it's what again one of those instances, like you said, where it can use the facts of Weird Al's career in a way that heightens the comedy because he's challenged by John Deacon and Wolfman Jack to do an impromptu parody of Another One Bites the Dust, and the it is the case on the recorded version of Another One Rides the Bus, isn't it? It is the case that the percussion is just provided by someone slapping an instrument case in the skiffle style, but in
Yeah,
this that becomes part of the kind of thinking on your feet ad hoc performance.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, it was it's kind of like you said, playing with what actually happened, and by throwing it into this other context, it kind of muddies the water a little bit, and it plays with again both the instant inspiration and the artist who can think on their feet, but also if the Weird Al story, you're saying, wait a minute, that's not exactly what happened. And again, the first time I watched this, I spent a lot of it being like, wait a minute, and then remembering what I was watching. Uh, there's a scene later they're teasing. He reunites with his family, and they're kind of teasing his hit "Fat," the Michael Jackson parody of "Bad." Because his mom is saying, "Oh, I've gained all this weight," and she's quoting lines from the song, and then he gets the inspiration to write "Amish Paradise" based on his dad's recollection of being, growing up Amish. So again, and the whole time I'm thinking, Mary Yankovic was a skinny lady. I don't think she was ever fat. But then you have to remember again, they're just setting you up for something else. So
There is a wonderful piece of lampshading they do with
Yeah.
that joke when the focus of the scene starts to switch towards his dad in the Amish background, and she does say, "Oh, I've gotten so fat," and Al goes, "Yeah, we've moved on from that."
Yeah. And it, and again, this is, the whole thing is supposed to take place in 1984, 85, and those songs were both done afterward. So again, it's just they're just playing fast and loose and on purpose.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
I feel like that might even be a riff on the way that biopics kind of condense and combine incidents, and they
Yes.
take, yeah, like, because that's, I mean, that's another thing that always kind of bothers me about a biopic. I think,
Yeah.
did one person do all this, and did it all happen at the same time, or are you just condensing this for narrative purposes, which obviously it is, but
Mm.
I think that this movie does a good job of playing with that too, um, just to keep the viewers on their feet and thinking about what's real, what's not, and does it matter even.
Yeah, and it has to happen quickly because at the end of the film, and we're skipping way forward here, but we will certainly double back and cover some of the stuff we've overlooked. But at the end of the film, Weird Al joins the 27 Club.
Yep. Yep.
which,
Exactly.
I liked that partly because it's just a very funny joke, but I think it gets to something essential about Weird Al that I think struck me during the research for UHF that I hadn't previously encountered before. But for all his humour is very light and silly, there's always that kind of macabre, grotesque undercurrent to it that I think comes through at the end there.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's never afraid to take it to the dark side.
Mm,
One of my favorite things about Weird Al has always been his love songs, which are some of the most caustic, bitter, if they were done by any other artist, he would have a reputation as, just writing these scathing, type of songs, but they just thrown in amongst all the songs about potatoes and spam and whatnot. It kind of varies the palette a little bit, but he definitely has that side of him, and I personally I love when he brings it out. So he's not afraid to get macabre and show his face melt during the acid trip and all that.
yes. Yeah, that is a very memorable image. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Um, so the stuff we've hopped over in large part deals with Evan Rachel Wood's performance as Madonna, which I think is superb. I remember when this was in production and when we were getting the first photos of this, and they were all causing a fuss because it was Daniel Radcliffe dressed as Weird Al. But I remember at that time, Madonna was working on a now abandoned biopic that she would co-write and direct. And I remember seeing that first picture of Evan Rachel Wood as Madonna and thinking, oh man, that must suck that the absolute perfect choice just played you in the Weird Al movie.
yeah, yeah, no, she looks fantastic. She's got the attitude. Yeah, she
Mm,
really is kind of the secret star of this movie, because she ends up having a much larger role than a lot of the other pop culture figures we've mentioned. And kind of
mm.
drives the story a bit for a while too.
And it's rooted in something that did genuinely happen to Al, that she suggested his parody of Like a Virgin.
Yeah, he doesn't. From what I know, he doesn't get a lot of. He never really took a lot of suggestions into heart. There was one time he famously got pitched to do a parody of the Mick Jagger song for Ruthless People, because the record company knew it was going to be a hit, and he said, "Okay, sure, I love Mick Jagger," and did a parody of the song, and no one remembers the song. So he generally doesn't do that. But yeah, I had heard the same thing about Like a Virgin, which he did as Like a Surgeon. And yeah, it's interesting because that what they're talking about, the Yankovic bunk, where like an artist, you know, knows they've made it when he's done a parody of one of their songs.
Mm.
Um, you know, for Madonna, I don't know, Like a Surgeon was that huge of a hit for Al, but it definitely, you know, came at the time when Madonna was like the one of the major stars, and still on the rise at the time too.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty early in her ascent, and I think that this is probably actually one of the few bits of the film where the timeline lines up with reality, probably. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite early on in her career, and we should probably pit stop for a bit and talk about our feelings about Madonna because she is someone who was, I mean, I said it was the 40th anniversary of Holiday. It is also the 40th anniversary of me this year. So Madonna has been famous for the whole of my life, and it's impossible not to feel somewhat sort of attached to someone who has shadowed you in that way.
Absolutely, yeah. She, you know, she was very instrumental, um, you know, through the '80s. I personally, I was a very big radio listener at the time when she was big. I was a top 40. You know, I was really into whatever was out, and Madonna was one of those people who was always there, and I always liked her songs, but I never became a huge fan. For me, like that '80s era are the songs that I really hold dear for her, like all the way through the, you know, maybe through like Justify My Love kind of era, you know,
Great
when
example.
things
Yeah.
started. I feel like her music became a little less pop oriented and more club oriented, like toward the mid late '90s. And personally, that's not my thing, so I kind of drifted away and didn't keep up with her. But up to that point, yeah, I can still listen to all that stuff and totally love it.
For me, it is the I do love the 80s stuff, but it is the mid 90s to turn of the millennium stuff that is just prime period Madonna to me. I think there's some wonderful songs in there, like Secret, Beautiful Stranger, What It Feels Like for a Girl, Frozen, just some of my favorite things she's ever done. And it was like I was aware of her during the 80s. I was very young, but I remember like I would hear Dear Jessie or some of the more daytime television friendly songs. I don't think they were playing Justify My Love to me during my childhood, but yeah, I was aware that she existed. And by the time I was old enough to like be seriously into music, it was when she was going through that backlash phase after she'd released Sex and Erotica, and everyone was like, "Oh, Jesus, enough already." So I had to be kind of a closeted Madonna fan in every sense of the word for a lot of the 90s until she had that comeback with Ray of Light, which was immediately and rightly held as you know, returning her to peak form. I think I can sympathise with a lot of what you're saying about how you sort of drifted away when the music became too clubby, because one of the odd and I think kind of laudable things about Madonna is that she hasn't had, unless you count Rave Light, she hasn't had her quote unquote mature phase, and she seems to see it as her duty to keep pace with whatever is big in the clubs. And you know, for those of us whose musical taste ages at a normal human rate, that means there's kind of always going to be a point when you hear Madonna and think I'm too old for this. Just in the same way that there's all like I was a huge Teenage Morrissey fan, but there's always a point where you hear Morrissey and think, "What's that twat whining about now?" But you know,
Yeah, yeah.
she has stuck to that vision with I think really impressive integrity.
Absolutely, yeah, no, and again, I think, like you said, I think it's a matter of maybe when you were born, maybe it's personal taste. I mean, I'm on the far end of the '40s myself, so
Yeah.
for me, it was just what was normalized when I was growing up, what the pop forms were. So there was a certain point where I was like, I'm too old for this. I've moved on to other, I don't need pop music anymore. I found these, niche and underground type stuff. Um, but I got to see Madonna back in when my former life as a professional writer about music and movies, and I think it was 2008 maybe when she was touring the states. Um, and I got to see her very close up. I was maybe 50 feet away from where she was standing at one point, and it's hard to be that close to someone that famous and not think, wow, that's a really famous person,
Yeah.
But even at that point, where I had kind of like fallen out, like keeping up with her music and everything, just an incredible performance. She sounded amazing, looked great, like not a step missed in the production, in her dancing, in everything. And, I've always, looked back on that experience and thought, it's one of those situations where I completely respect her as an artist, and her forward momentum, even if it's not all for me. And just finding stuff in there to appreciate was really kind of a revelation, and kind of took me down a peg from my I'm too old for this, I'm too good for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can't deny that she is just a force to be reckoned with.
Oh yeah, she is one of those people where, I mean, we unfortunately had to sort of think about this because she had a health scare earlier this year that thankfully she seems to have fully recovered from now. But it does put into perspective that when Madonna does die, hopefully far in the future, people will just look on that as the end of an era. That will be one of those things where people say, "Wow, they do not make stars of that caliber anymore."
True. They don't. I feel, she came before the era where self promotion was the way to the top. She had handlers and that whole machinery, but was also able to be completely independent within it, or at least give the impression of someone who was calling the shots, who was, in control of her image, of everything she did, and that chameleonic nature, her constantly keeping up, changing, reinventing herself. Sometimes it's she marries Guy Ritchie and makes a remake of Swept Away, and sometimes
I, I mean, I was there was a part of me in putting this Madonna season together. There was a part of me that thought Swept Away. You've got to do Swept Away, but I feel like anything it prompted me to say about Guy Ritchie would fall foul of the United Kingdom's very strict libel laws because it it is impossible to watch that film and come out with a good impression of Guy Ritchie.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. And again, I think it's part of her legacy though, because she's willing
Yeah,
to do things like that, and not necessarily paint herself in the best light. And it's interesting because the confidence that she exudes through that, and in her music and everything else, it's just it's all part of the same person.
well, when we was Oliver and I were talking about Dangerous Game on the Patreon, we were saying what an insane thing that was for a superstar of that level to do. And for Oliver, he's not a Madonna fan, not in his youth, not at any time. And so a lot of his impression of who Madonna is was formed from being a big Abel Ferrara fan and watching that movie. And but
Interesting.
even he was like vaguely aware that this isn't the sort of film that a massive, globally famous pop star does usually.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, again, yeah, I think that she's the kind of star who can do stuff like that, and people will, it'll draw attention to the film, but like it won't in any way have any impact on her image, her fan base, because everybody's come to expect her doing what she wants.
Yeah, by that point in the early 90s, she'd moved to that tastemaker position where she can do something that's quite unlike what's in the mainstream or what's expected of her, and people will just look at it and say, "Oh, that must be cool now because Madonna's doing it." That was her incredible luxury. I mean, there's a lot of things about fame that I don't envy, but that must be a magnificent position to be in
Yeah,
just for
for
that.
whatever you're into right now, then everybody else kind of gloms on and
Yeah.
follows. Yeah, yeah, I did. I I'm curious as to how much she's able to do that these days.
Mm.
But again, is that just we kill our idols, we our older stars, we tend to like shuffle off to the side as new people come up, and but I feel like the newer pop stars wouldn't be who they were if it weren't for Madonna too.
Yeah, there is a definite kind of female pop star who you can immediately recognize as being post Madonna, even if the music doesn't sound like it. There are people like Rihanna where you think, you wouldn't be able to like have that attitude and behave that way and have that kind of image as a mainstream pop star if it wasn't for Madonna.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, and even beyond her music, I think that reach and that influence is going to be remembered. Is what she as much as when the time she forced Weird Al to become an alcoholic, and all the other true things that are in this movie.
It's
Um,
a brutal assassination of him, which I think was. I've talked a lot of. I've said a lot of nice things about Madonna, but there are some things she did that I can't defend, and it's that cover of American Pie
mm,
and murdering Al Yankovic. That's
yeah,
the two big ones for me
yeah,
in that
right,
order.
exactly. And she when she took over for Escobar and became an international drug lord. I mean, you can't cover everything up. Just a side note on that, I just finished watching Narcos
Oh yeah,
on Netflix like shortly before we watched this. So seeing Arturo Castro, who was on Narcos, playing a different character, playing Pablo Escobar, was kind of a trip.
yeah. That's a great bit of the film. I think it comes at that point where you are thinking, all right, this has been fun, but I don't know how they can stretch out like this joke into the last act. And having Al Yankovic become like a sort of Liam Neeson, Sylvester Stallone character, rampaging through Latin America, fighting Pablo Escobar is just brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's all true, so can't
Yeah.
uh, can't argue with it.
So are there any, I mean, we've gone through the film's major plot points. Are there any other little details or performances that you'd like to spotlight?
Again, I do want to say that the kid actor who plays Weird Al at the beginning of the film really looks like him. Like
Yeah.
having just seen pictures of him, it's and they show in the end credits, um, what he looked like when he was younger, and yeah, it's really remarkable. I don't think I noticed that the first time I watched it. And then the only other thing I would say is that um, the like a surgeon dancers come on in with the Madonna cone bra, which again total anachronism from
Yeah.
1985. But yeah, that was one thing I didn't notice the first time I saw it, and again, just another little detail, and this movie's full of them. You don't even have to be an Al fan. You don't necessarily need to be a Madonna fan, but to be able to appreciate some of those like little nuances and jokes that they threw in, intentionally getting the facts wrong, and then
Yeah.
also building upon what they were riffing with. It just, I don't know. I think it makes this just a lot richer and more able uh, to pick up as you rewatch it, if you're a fan and willing to do that. So I know
Mm.
I think they just recently announced that there's going to be a physical media release for this. So
All right.
personally, I'll be picking it up, but hopefully soon.
Isn't it quite weird that that's become like a mark of distinction for a movie. Wow, they're releasing this thing on disc.
Right, right, yeah. For a straight to streaming, and especially for straight to Roku,
Yeah,
they're not. I mean, they're not. I didn't know that they had their own channel. It's a, it's a. I thought of them as a competitor to the Amazon Fire Stick. So that I think this was their big debut as a production house, and I don't know that they've done anything since that people have talked about. But it's interesting that that's where it started.
do you think that, I mean, dare we dream big and think that this could be the start of a whole new series of Roku physical releases? Might we get the Quibi library on Blu-ray?
If only those 50 states of horror that they started, and I don't think they actually finished on Quibi. Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that just kind of abandoned. So it would be interesting to see if how physical uh, media starts to pick some of that stuff up, because we know that it'll, like we know from streaming services now, nothing is safe. So some of that stuff could
Yeah.
get lost to the ether unless we have discs. So as a man with a basement full of discs, I'm all for it.
No, absolutely the same. And I've been thinking for a long time that there is something wonderful about owning a film or a show that you love rather than being temporarily allowed access to it by some streaming corporation. And as you say, now that they're just raising stuff from their libraries and even shows that they haven't aired yet. I think there was like Disney Plus had a young adult series that
Mm,
they just completely filmed and then decided to bin. So we'll never see that. I mean, it's absolutely monstrous, and it justifies the SAG-AFTRA strike and the Writers
absolutely.
Guild strike on its own, in my opinion. But yes, yeah, look forward to that. So, if you enjoyed this, as we've mentioned a few times, we have a Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you'll get a monthly bonus episode of Pop Screen, as well as our other podcasts from the video aisle, which at the time of recording is starting a journey through the Rec found footage horror
Mm,
franchise. We do written reviews as well of classic science fiction and fantasy television. I've currently wrapped up my Doctor Who project and am working on a bid to rewatch every conspiracy episode of The X-Files to find out if it actually makes sense or not.
mm,
And Alex Payne is doing a complete chronological Red Dwarf watch through. So
mm.
there's tons of stuff you get for just £1 or £3, depending on your tier, a month. But until next fortnight, when we'll be back with another free episode of Pop Screen, starting our Halloween month, that's been your lot from us. I've been Graham,
And I've been Jeff.
and we'll see you in a fortnight's time.